rates, whether it's private companies or
Yeah, my
governments, is a
browser
major problem.
crashed.
I'm not going to get into
So we're gonna have to do
debt
2 videos.
financing and the intricacies of deficits. I think that's a separate debate. That we
Yeah,
need
the
to
only
have
thing I would
another
touch
time.
on there is Japan's public GDP ratio is vastly worse than the United States'.
Yeah, it's about 250%, I think now. So
290% now.
Oh wow, okay. So my point being is that I agree with Kim in that sense. I don't, and also on the point that he's right that the US has had what's known as primacy or hegemonic status for the past 30 years, up until around 2008. No country was even remotely able to touch.
Look at how
the US.
bad like the
Since then,
Shuriken
we've
is, for
had
example.
change in president
My
of
God.
China.
Just
premiers. President Xi is a much more aggressive,
really, really bad compared to
hawkish
Shotgun. But I do need like
predecessor,
a lot more
and he's been much
things,
more
so
willing to
I'm gonna have to take some other skill
do
systems.
what he thinks is needed to undertake national rejuvenation, which is this whole idea of rebuilding China to its glory days. We've had a much more revanchist or just sort of expansionist kind of Russia. We've got other countries like Turkey, Saudi Arabia. All these countries are beginning to rear their heads. I do think, though, that
just
the
occurs, maybe.
BRICS are overutilized, as an example. I've given my reasons before. They do represent some of the largest and most important economies in the world, but unfortunately...
And that's BRICS are Brazil, Russia, India, and China.
And South Africa.
And
Yeah,
South
Africa. South Africa joined in 2000.
Oh yeah, of course, there's the S. Yeah, of course, because I remember BRIC before the S. So 2010, South Africa joined the S. Okay.
In 2010, and but there's other countries that are doing better than South Africa. Nigeria is plagued by corruption, but technically its economy has done better. Other countries are performing better in Africa as well. So the point is that the BRICS, as a principle, is a nice idea, a collection of countries that want to counterbalance against the United States primacy and the West. Totally fair enough, but a lot of them have a lot of systemic issues which have hindered their ability to do so. And as I've said before, the one thing that doesn't unite these countries as much is that they are different economic models, they're different political models, and they primarily have varying degrees of opinions about what they think the world should look like. Most of them agree on multipolarity, but in terms of who, how, regionalism, transformationalism, globalism, what kind of...
Yeah, multipolarity is not on the agenda anymore.
I'll say before I shut up.
It is literally unipolarity
just
at this
to add your
point.
point there, Piotr,
Meaning that all the governance of the world would be run from one
to a totally
place.
different type of leader, so that changes the landscape of BRICS right now too.
True. I mean, Lula, who won for those of you, Lula is a very left-leaning candidate versus Bolsonaro, who's obviously a right-wing, very right-wing. They're both populists in their respective ways.
Yeah, but
what's
this
interesting...
is sorry, this is just wrong, because the decision to join BRICS was made before Bolsonaro became president.
I'm not talking about BRICS, Kim. I'm talking about Brazil's outlook on the war. Lula is as anti the war as Bolsonaro.
Let me just correct something here, right? Because making this about Bolsonaro is wrong.
I'm not making it about Bolsonaro.
It's not about making it about Bolsonaro, Kim. It's about simply mentioning the fact that there's been a change in leadership in one of the key countries of BRICS, which, yes, existed for many, many cycles, many annual cycles before Bolsonaro ever got involved, but Bolsonaro definitely fit more with the Russian and Chinese version of the BRICS mindset.
Just to make it very clear, Lula has already stated that he doesn't want a new Cold War between the United States and China. He thinks that Zelensky and Putin are equally... Let me finish.
None of the BRICS parties wants a Cold War. I mean, that's a given. But what's important is also that BRICS is not just 5 countries.
Well,
right? There are many more countries. No. It's now a BRICS plus format. It's not just 5 countries.
None of this is formalized, Kim. It's just countries expressing their interest in joining an organization that doesn't even have a fucking mandate. It doesn't even have a framework.
Things are getting heated.
It's just a bunch of countries banding together to talk about
I'll let you.
Because you don't know what you're talking about.
I'll let
you don't know what you're talking about.
Yes, I do. Because I study this and work in it fucking professionally every fucking day.
Careful, bro. Careful. We'll try to keep the cursing down a bit.
It's pissing me off. I know.
Yeah, I would just put it this way, like the BRICS.
I would really like to respond to this for a second, because this is important stuff, right? We can't have Piotr here yelling at everyone and using swear words because we don't agree with him. Let me just say to you what I know about BRICS. BRICS is not just the 5 countries, it's a BRICS plus setup. 12 more countries have now applied to join, including Saudi Arabia. which is basically the powerhouse behind the petrodollar. So to come here and talk about this is just a small group of irrelevant countries, they have all these problems, they can never compete with the US, it's just wrong.
I didn't say that. I never said
wait,
they couldn't
I'm
compete.
not done.
But he also...
So
Go ahead,
BRICS Plus is really, as it looks right now, and as it comes together with even more nations joining, a real competitor to the US and even the entire West. Because BRICS Plus combined will have a larger GDP than the US and the EU. So to put this down as some kind of small group of irrelevant players is really
Never
nonsense.
said that. Never said that. Also, let's think about it. We've got ASEAN. We've got the SCO, which is actually probably much more of a relevant entity than the BRICS. SCO is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It consists of about 20 states, much more than just the BRICS. The BRICS Plus is an idea that countries like Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and others, Argentina, want to join this organization because of the economic potential that
Still
it can
living
do.
for one
But
moment
none
at
of this
least.
exists in a mandate. There is not a document that exists for the BRICS by which to conduct these things. NATO has a
Python,
mandate,
you know,
I will-
you and
I will-
Cam,
I will- I'll
organization.
go.
I wanted to say something. I just wanted to say something really quick. I think the bigger overarching issue for the audience that may not understand BRICS is what you're talking about is what Putin referred to, and Kimmy brought it up, and I did earlier, the 2007 speech, the unipolar world versus the multipolar world.
Yeah.
So for the audience listening, BRICS is the manifestation of the multipolar
Yes, indeed.
direction that the world could go in.
Multipolar.
I think I
Multiple.
want to bring you back.
Yeah.
Tara, sorry, because I know Piotr, you want to continue your point. Tara, I don't want to interrupt you, but I know Dimitri's been waiting for a while as well as Max and Protocol.
Yeah, I just want to make
Max
one.
speak.
I just want to make one quick sentence.
Quick
in
check,
there.
quick, please check, bro.
There's been 0 BRICS Plus summits. There's only been BRICS summits, so that's a key indicator of how much.
Okay, so
it's
we'll
going on here.
go to Dimitri.
Yeah, maybe also
You've been waiting.
Game.com might
Do you
have
mind if I go to
something
Dimitri because he's
Yes,
been waiting
sorry,
for a while?
I'll
to say that
Oh,
these
okay.
other
Everyone is
guys
not
just don't have access
Oh,
to
good.
that
Well,
kind of
I look,
information.
man.
Like,
I
oh
curse
my
more
God.
than you, so
Jeez.
Dimitri, I'll let you go, man.
Unreal.
Thanks a lot for waiting, bro.
No worries. Thanks for having me. And I realize the space moves really fast. I'm coming back on a point from like 300 years ago. But a lot of the people on this call are very rightly skeptical about what they're hearing and what they're seeing from intelligence services. So I wanted to come back specifically as someone who was on the ground and talking to governments very shortly after the Revolution of Dignity. I was with the Australian Task Force looking at MH17 and trying to get those bodies back. Just to highlight one distinction as you're looking at a lot of these
makes no difference
evidence,
whatsoever.
and that is to separate a revolution that the US was supportive of, and I think happy about, and I think there is unequivocal evidence that the US considered the Revolution of Dignity a good thing for US interests, versus a causal relationship between what the US did and what ended up happening first in November of 2013 and then in all the way through to February of 2014 with the ultimate removal of the president. That was a very complex situation that in large part was frankly down to a president that massively overreacted to initial student protests over a pivot away from an EU economic cooperation agreement to one with to closer alignment with Russia, and who reacted quite brutally and then put a lot of people on the street that frankly weren't that political, but who saw the repressions as a line in the sand too far. So the one point I'd make, and then I'll shut up and I'll let you get back to this fascinating debate, is to say that I think as much as it is really wise to be skeptical of what intelligence services are doing and to believe that they can have outside influence, it is also not, I think it is also doing a disservice both to ordinary people and I think to you as informed observers to assign them greater powers than I think they had. And I think if the CIA could trigger a successful popular uprising, or at least mass uprising, in a country the size of Ukraine, where that wasn't already about to happen, I think the world would be a very different place. So I'm not saying one way or the other.
Oh, the projectile speed on the bullets of this shotgun
please
basically
do separate
determine the
in your
distance
mind,
that it travels.
was the US supportive? Was the US trying to help out here or there? Versus were there hundreds of thousands of people on the street because of what the US did. And I'll absolutely leave it there and let you get back to your debate, which is fascinating to listen into. So thanks for having me.
Dimitri, this is a very interesting point that you're making. I just want to ask you a question. After the revolution, the new government that came in investigated who were these snipers that turned the peaceful demonstrations into the violent overturn of the government. What has the new government that was installed, what have they done to identify the snipers? Have they prosecuted them? Have they maybe issued a law that gave an amnesty to everyone who was involved in it? Like, how has the new government responded to this massive aggression and the murder of 100 people? Can you elaborate on that?
What a loaded question.
Dimitri, do you want to take that one? Or Chet, I think you want to jump in.
I think Chet may have to jump in for me and I'm working on this with the technical team, but for some reason I can't hear Kim.com and I haven't been able to this entire time. I'm so sorry.
No, all good. It happens a lot on Twitter Spaces. So Chet, do you want to repeat the question for Dimitri and then you give your response, Chet, and then we'll give it back to Dimitri?
2022,
so
you can't get technology like Twitter Spaces
the question
working.
essentially
It's
for
ridiculous.
you is from Kim.com. He's asking about the snipers that were involved in the situation, of course, during the 2014 situation that happened in Ukraine with the massive uprising and the snipers, etc., and of course, the murders that we know that occurred and the different deaths. He's asking why there haven't been prosecutions, essentially, in that regard under the new government.
So my best understanding, I think it's a really good question, Kim, is that a lot of the power structures that existed under Yanukovych and that were active, whether that is through the Berkut, which is a fairly horrifying thing you get, which is effectively like if the FBI had a massive paramilitary riot police body. In Russia, it's called the Oman. In Ukraine, it's called the Berkut. And they were the ones who I think were on the front lines. It wasn't the army suppressing the protests or sort of fighting the protests. It was these Berkut guys and various security elements. So I think there are two answers to that question. I think the first one is a lot of those elements bled out of Ukraine afterwards. So that's like point one. They ended up in Russia. They ended up in other places. Point two, it was just a massive clusterfuck of confusion where a whole bunch of people in masks on every side were doing a whole bunch of things to people, sometimes in masks, sometimes without masks, on every other side. And so it is just incredibly difficult to, I think Tara mentioned Oliver Stone's documentary. There's also a really great documentary on Netflix called Winter on Fire that just has a lot of original footage. And you can just see the absolute insanity and chaos of what it looked like on the ground in Maidan Square during these revolutions. Like, nobody knows who did what. And so I think that might be another reason for prosecution. I would also not rule out an attempt to kind of put that situation behind people in an attempt to move the country forward, which you can certainly question the wisdom and the justice of. And I'm so sorry if you're replying or trying to speak over me, Kim. I genuinely
there's something
not, I can't hear.
Yeah, no,
okay.
it happens very often.
I'm so sorry.
All good. I do want to say something, right?
This
is important.
Yeah, I need to. So yeah, before you do, Kim, I just need to remove. Yeah, no, I would, but I need to remove Dimitri and bring him back up so he can hear you, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So let me just do that quickly now, Dimitri. Let me just do it now. And what we could do, Kim, because I also want to get Wyatt to do. So while we bring up Dimitri, I'm actually doing it now, so she's gonna be quick. Dimitri, I've just sent you through an invite. Kim, I've also sent you a DM. We need to bring someone else into the space. I need your help.
Yeah.
So I've sent you a DM about that, please.
Yeah.
Dimitri's back. Dimitri, can you hear Kim? Kim, do you want to speak?
Can you hear me now, Dimitri? Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your answer. Unfortunately, chat has not exactly given you the question that I had. Like, he cut it a bit short. But the point that I'm trying to make here, right, if it was facilitated by the Yanukovych government at the time that these snipers are shooting demonstrators, then surely the new government would have made an effort to identify these people, to put them on the stand, to have trials, and to lock them up for life. But none of that happened, which to me indicates very strongly that the new people who came into power didn't want to actually go into the matter and wanted it covered up. And in the end, what they did, they legalized this entire affair by saying we're giving an amnesty to anyone who was involved with it. We're not going to look into it anymore. And to me, that really is the strongest indication that those people who rose to power because of those snipers had no interest in identifying them.
Dimitri, do you hear the answer? So I'll go to Max. Anything else to add to this, Dimitri?
Look, I think it's entirely legitimate for Kim to ask that question. I will say there were some prosecutions after the Euromaidan, the chief of the counterintelligence services and so on. But I think it's legitimate for Kim to ask the question of what does it imply that there wasn't a more systemic effort to prosecute. I mean, you know, if you're talking about the new government,
this game has
probably they would be focused on
a few
the Berkut and
interesting
others
new
who were
mechanics
kind
in
of
this
on
genre.
the ground and doing things
That's
like
how
shooting protesters off
One of
buildings.
them is the
I
dropping
think
of the
it's
skills
entirely
from the
legitimate
monsters
to
kind of
ask
randomly.
that question. I don't think you can necessarily draw the conclusion that this implies that the snipers were either automatically in league with the government or sort of foreign assets. As I said, I think there was both a lot of confusion and a lot of questions of how you would even go about such a prosecution. And I think secondly, it's also fair to say that there was a genuine effort to, as Kim said, grant a blanket amnesty for things everybody did and try to move on, which as Kim rightly says, you can ask questions about, and you can certainly question if that's a wise or a just thing to do. I think that's a very legitimate question.
So I'll go to Kim. I'm going to go to Max because I can't wait to have Wyatt speak as well, since he's on the ground in Ukraine, from what Tara told us. So Max, I know you've been waiting for a while. I'll let you jump in, and then we'll go to Wyatt right after. Go ahead, Max.
That takes 5.
Thank you, Maria. Let me give a little background. I was born
if I do
Ukraine,
25.
but I live in the States right now, so it's been left before the fall of
That's
Soviet
a lot of
Union.
experience.
And just to give a context of my biases,
so we'll do that next time.
My closest circle are all pro-Ukrainian, right? We're Jewish diaspora from who lived in Ukraine and born in Ukraine, and I have friends from Chernovtsi. I have family from Odessa. So, given that, I'm actually a somewhat of a black sheep of the family, you might say, right? So, I think
like
from
one focus strikes. I don't think we need to do anything
of
anymore.
legitimacy of the war, right? The justification of the war.
Yeah, but this is the thing, right? Like, there's nothing else.
Try to anchor on the point that the military conflict actually started in 2014, right? I think that's an important point, and that goes against
So you're saying that the military conflict between Ukraine and Russia started in 2014 during the revolution?
Ukraine and the pro-Russian Ukraine.
Okay.
Pro-Western.
Sorry. You're talking about the war in. Was it what was not Crimea? The first one. The war was
the DNR
Crimea.
and LNR. Right?
Okay, yeah.
Donetsk, the Donetsk and Luhansk provinces, when they were undertaken by engagement between.
That's where the debate is. Was it Russian separatists or was it Russian mercenaries? Was it a mix of both?
Well, they became infamous. They were known as Little Green Men.
Speed.
Openly Russian forces without the insignia of Russian military were coming into Crimea, and then they were also supporting Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine.
So Max, go ahead.
Yeah. So, and to Tora's point, I'm not arguing of whether there was Russian involvement, whether they provided the assistance, right? The military or assistance to those. The question is, what was the public sentiment in those regions, and whether they were legitimate, right? To me, by the way, when the Maidan occurred, I was watching live streams from Kiev, from Euromaidan. I was rooting for protesters. But hindsight, and with all the information that came out years past that, to me, if you try to look at it objectively, we had the constitutional government, whether it was pro-Russian, popular or not, right? Which was Yanukovych, his election was certified by various international observers, right? We have a constitutional government that was violently overthrown. To me, that negates the right. It's i.e. constitution, something that constituted the country, right? So at that point, to me, I would actually interpret Kiev government to be a separate.
That's a big statement. I know what you're trying to say. You're trying to say that the initial government was overthrown. It delegitimizes that government, and essentially delegitimizes the territory that was the Donetsk and Luhansk region.
It opens the door for legitimate
Russian involvement.
Legitimate,
or becoming a separate country and break away from Ukraine.
Correct.
Understood. Okay, I understand your point. I will go to Wyatt, Max, if you don't mind, and I'll go back to you in a bit, because I know Wyatt has been waiting for a while, so I appreciate you sharing this. Wyatt, appreciate you being here, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
So you're in Ukraine now, or you were in Ukraine?
I am not. I was in the Donbass for several weeks, but I am in Rome currently right now. But I did spend quite a bit of time there very recently.
Okay. And what's your, if you don't mind sharing, what's your take? Where's your position on the war, very briefly? And then I'd love to know your experience on the ground. Actually, I want to kick it off with your experience on the ground first, and then we'll get your position on the war. How is it? When were you there? How's life there? How's the community? How are the people?
Yeah, so I went during the referendums. So basically, for about a month, the end.
Dead rug again? What happened?
Ukraine's counter-offensive gained ground. And then they declared all these different regions as part of Russia. Is that or separate? Was it part of? Yeah, as part of Russia, correct?
It kind of depended somewhat on the actual region that we're talking about. In the Donetsk People's Republic, Lugansk People's Republic, for example, they were voting to basically form their own separate republics. In Kherson and Zaporozhye, it was closer to do with realigning. There was a slight differentiation in terms of the actual legal language that was used on the ballots. But yeah, I got a chance to go down to pretty much all of those regions, with the exception of Zaporozhye. And yeah, I mean, in the terms of just the day-to-day life and what the previous speaker was talking about, it's not necessarily quite as abundantly clear when you go to, say, Zaporozhye or Kherson. When you're in Donetsk or you're in Lugansk, it's very clear that people there do not consider themselves to be subjects of the Ukrainian government.
Wow.
They don't view that government as their government. They view it as kind of an occupying force.
Whoa.
And this is a widespread opinion. This is almost everyone you talk to. I mean, sure, you can find differing opinions pretty much anywhere you go, anywhere in the world. But it's a lot like Crimea or something, where just the vast majority of the population there, 90+%,
that's a big statement.
Is going to be overwhelmingly.
So that's a fair point. So you're talking about those.
That's not correct. Sorry, I just disagree with that. I'll let you finish.
Okay, so offer your contradicting evidence. Offer some evidence that contradicts it then.
The referendum votes that were held in '91 and in more recent years that have stated that over 90% of Ukrainians actually identify.
Okay, so if you want to take your case here and go back 30 years and use that as a litmus test for how people think about the government today, I mean, that to me on its face is already questionable.
What about the Khrushchev and Brezhnev governments that were also repurposing different parts of Ukraine to populate it with more ethnic Russians to influence it? I mean, it was Khrushchev in 1954 that gave Crimea to Ukraine, didn't they?
Okay, you know, yeah. I mean, if you want to go all the way back to like Lenin and talk
Well,
about
we need
the
to, yeah,
creation of
absolutely.
Ukraine,
You were
you
talking
know,
about
then
timescales.
yeah, sure. I mean, I think
It's so ridiculous.
some more points
So
to
Wyatt,
you know, kind
just
of what
just
Putin
to
was
the
talking about, but
to
you
the
know,
to the
I
point.
would rather finish up my point.
Yeah, to the point you're making when you said that the sentiment there. How many people did you speak to, just approximately, and what gave you that sense, if you don't mind me asking?
I spoke to hundreds of people.
Hundreds of people. There you
What
go.
gave me the sense is just what people told me. You know, I spent quite a bit of time in towns that were along the front line, and really, kind of the closer you get to the front line,
Wyatt Reed.
the more you get a sense that people are really have very
Guy who's
solid,
actually
strong
gone
feelings
there.
on this conflict.
So, as
You know, you
someone
can
else
go
who was
further
also
back.
at the front lines, I can just attest that that's just not correct. Also, I'd like to point out
As
that
opposed to
you
whoever
work
now is
for
speaking.
Sputnik, which is a Russian media company. So just keep in mind that there may be a degree of positioning on this. Yes, you can say that because I work for the World Bank. I have positioning, but I want to make that very clear that there's,
Thank you for making that clear.
you do represent a specific organization and therefore potentially narrative.
And you effectively represent sort of this kind of transnational elite class. You know, that's
No,
kind
I'm
of
not
your
making it
your
personal,
background.
mate. I'm just stating.
Sure,
I'm
no,
just
I
making an
know, but you
observation.
know, I'm not making that personal either. You know,
But
let's just make
it
it
would
right
be
to
much
the end.
easier to believe you if you didn't use that kind of tone, the condescending
Yes.
tone that you
It's an
have.
observation that you work
Yes,
for
no,
Sputnik. It's one of
the
the
way
biggest
you
mouthpieces
talk,
of the Russian
Exactly.
regime. I
Kim
know
is
it.
exactly
Kim,
right.
for all the people that
everyone
talk of
here.
being condescending, you're awfully big on that.
I have a quick question for you. Sorry, bro. I have a quick question. So, and I'm actually genuinely curious on this one. So, when you spoke to the people there, what's their... So, if they're, and I've seen this in other wars, if some people are supporting a certain, let's say they're in a certain territory and they're supporting another country, they want to be part of another country, like in this case, I'm just assuming what you said, based on what you said. But when it comes to war, so when the civil war started, a lot of people will be like, "Fuck this!" Like now, I wish I never, never thought, never wanted to get into Russia because now I'm living war, and my life is worse, and war tends to change people's minds. Now, what was their sentiment considering they've gone through the civil war and now the much bigger war that the Ukraine and Russia are going through? Is the sentiment still like, hey, it was all worth it that we're part of Russia and as objectively as possible? Or they're like, fuck this, I miss the old days. Even though I prefer to be in Russia, I wish, that all this never happened and we're still part of Ukraine. I don't know if you get my question, Wyatt. It's more of a, question about sentiment there after what they've been through.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important question, and it's an interesting one. I mean, my sense is that, it's an intensely personal question, right? What does worth it mean to any given person? And it boils down to, I think, on some level, to what extent, like Russian Federation forces, when they came in and kind of took this territory, to what extent they were able to reestablish some level of normalcy for the people there. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about, I feel Ukrainian or I feel Russian. It's about this particular government doesn't address any of my most pressing needs. It's not helping me.
Okay.
So they're feeling better taken care of now
The
that
bullet
the Russian
speed is
government
broken for this gun, my
that
god.
territory is more aligned with the Russian government.
Certainly, the people that I spoke to, that was the sense overwhelmingly. Although I will say there are still issues, and I think personally I interpreted this as kind of a holdover from some of the kind of Soviet era bureaucracy that can sometimes make that difficult for people to get access to the goods that they need to survive. And after Russian forces come, there are certainly lots of issues in terms of how that's playing out. But far and away, the vast majority of the people that I spoke to, they described themselves as feeling liberated. They described the opposition as
and what's
wow. Vast majority feels liberated. There you go. My god.
On the ground,
Where have you ever heard that before?
Referenda, right?
Nowhere.
Yeah.
You've seen the Western media reporting about it as sham referenda, people led to the polls on gunpoint, people basically being forced to vote for Russia. what have you seen on the ground? Do you think that is an accurate description of what happened there?
And before you answer, Wyatt, before you answer that, it's a good question, Kim. It's also, Kim, I just want to make a disclaimer that he was in one region. Obviously, the referendum was in multiple regions. So I just want to make that distinction. It's an important one.
He said earlier that he traveled to all 4 regions.
Okay, yeah, so fair point. Yeah, so Wyatt, just make sure you point out which regions you were in, because I know the referendum was in various regions. So I'll let you answer that question by Kim. It's a good question. And the point I was making before, Kim, as well, so you can address both of them at the same time, was I forgot mine. When I remember mine, I'll come back to it. But Wyatt, I'll let you.
Okay.
Okay, I'll let you go after that person. Go ahead, Wyatt.
My God.
In terms of those regions, which ones I saw, I mainly saw voting. I saw voting in Kherson, and I saw voting in. I saw refugees voting in Russian-held territory. So this would be further over in Crimea, Sevastopol.
All right, so that's gonna
people voting in Moscow.
Well, actually, we're gonna have to let this run.
People don't know this, but the majority of the Ukrainians who've left the country due to the conflict went to Russia. They did not go to the West.
Was it easier to go to Russia?
That wasn't voluntary.
Well, there's certainly many questions to be asked about who's voluntarily moving from one side to the other. What happens to people who do attempt to go back to Russia? Certainly, by all indications, many convoys have been bombed by Ukrainian forces, these civilians. Sorry, I just want to get back to the question, though. What I saw was I did not see a single person being forced at gunpoint to vote. I saw dozens of people who came out. Many of them had tears in their eyes. Many of them were elderly people who described this as basically the first real chance at self-determination that they'd had in decades. It was very meaningful for a lot of people in a way that I honestly don't really understand as somebody from the West who has, elections that are pretty meaningless to for me personally. I think those people had a much more real chance at self-determination than a lot of us will ever have in the West. And that was basically what I was told over and over again. Certainly some people were just kind of more casual voters. Some people, it's just, I'm doing this not because I love Russia, but because I want for the water to work in my house. But I want, my kids to have a place to go to school. I want to have a shot at getting jobs and getting roads paved in my town. So certainly some people were more, I would say, pragmatic about it, and not going into this as partisans or as ideologues. But there are quite a few people who also, and this is a point that somebody tried to correct me on that I just don't think is right. What they said, people when they get closer to the front, they do feel more strongly about this because they've been more impacted personally by the conflict. They've lost friends, they've lost family, oftentimes. In very senseless artillery strikes. My hotel was struck about 2 hours after I arrived in downtown Donetsk in a shelling that hit an entirely civilian zone. There were no military targets there. It was just a very well-known hotel that is known to host international journalists. That's something that people there have been living through for 8 years. And that, to me, really resonated when I saw so many people there that viewed the referendum as a chance for self-determination. It became a lot clearer for me why when I experienced that myself.
I have to Piotr, I'll let you go ahead, Piotr. Go ahead.
I got to head out. I just wanted, if I could speak really quickly, because I got to go to Thanksgiving dinner with family. I think, the focus, all people who know me know all I care about is the U.S. and the West. I'm honest about it. I'm objective about it. And I think this conversation in regards to Ukraine is just simplistic, and I'll say why. I mean, it's clear that the Ukrainians in the West had a national identity, Catholicism, etc., and it's been solidified with this war. And for Ukraine and Russia, this war is existential. That's indisputable. But I look at NATO expansion into the Russian sphere, whether it's the Baltics, Ukraine, etc., as reckless and just a glorified weapons program to a lot of these corrupt nations. When we're talking about the dangers posed to the West from this conflict, right, we have already seen now the emergence of a multipolar world. You have the U.S. and the West, which is basically Western Europe. You got the Sino-Russian sphere, and you have an emerging non-aligned sphere, right? And it looks like India is going to be leading, right? There's India, Israel, Turkey, which is a part of NATO, and countless other countries don't want to be split between these two great powers when they're dependent on their financial, economic, monetary system for one, and raw resources and manufacturing to the other, right? They're being forced to choose between raw resources and energy that both their countries and people need. Like, nobody's talking about Somalia. They're experiencing mass famine. Look at Lebanon, what's going on, etc. This war has completely worsened food and energy issues. Yeah, Europe was managed to stock up enough LNG for this winter, hopefully, if it doesn't get cold. But this issue is going to exist and be exacerbated for the next 2 or 3 years if this war does not end, because Europe doesn't have the energy infrastructure and regasification facilities to actually deal with the LNG imports, right? When we speak about the Russian, Sinosphere, we can't just speak about the BRICS, right? We need to look also at the Belt and Road Initiative and China's economic deals, right? Ignoring the BRICS, where Turkey's a NATO ally and arguably may have the strongest second military, at least in the Middle East, it has the strongest out of NATO allies, and the Saudi petrodollar. The Belt and Road Initiative, these deals, like China has signed multi-decade deals with Iran, with Syria, in Latin America, which has completely decimated the Monroe Doctrine, at least in regards to economic issues. They've signed up to build nuclear facilities in Argentina, Ecuador. They just signed a new corn deal with Brazil, etc. This is all stuff that's going to erode and affect U.S. and Western geopolitical power as time goes on. And a little known fact about the Belt and Road Initiative deals is that there's provisions inside that allows China to flip a switch to allow trade to be denominated in the yuan. Right. So when we look at this, in addition to sanctions, right, sanctions long term, in my opinion, are going to backfire. You see central banks moving away from from dollar reserves and towards gold because they see what happened to Russia. And you see an increase in non-dollar denominated trade. Right. Look no further than India, Pakistan, and other countries that basically said, listen, if it comes to supporting Ukraine or feeding my people and keeping the lights on, I'm going to choose the latter. And there's been a real big split. To me, this has not made the West more powerful, regardless of what mainstream media has said. It has weakened us, and it's. Am I saying this is something that's going to occur overnight? No, I agree with Piotr on this. But I see a beachhead being established that will steadily erode U.S. power unless there's clear and fundamental shift. Right? People forget Western Europe is going to be pissed too. Right? Was it the Finland or Sweden who just came out that said it was clear sabotage? What happened to the Nord Stream pipeline? Well, if they had any evidence to connect it to Russia,
No way.
they would have screamed it from the top of their lungs, but there is none. And there's been whispers more and more, and there's been allegations that communications have been taken.
But I mean, it's pretty clear that it was sabotage.
Spearhead this.
It's pretty clear.
Any possible leverage to allow for negotiated settlement and peace. The EU right now, if you look at economics, inflation surveys, they're undergoing a process of deindustrialization at the same time where the U.S. just passed, its new, I'm not sure if it's the infrastructure deal, which is going to start taking their industry. You have 30% of industry shutting down in Europe. Europe is facing a massive catastrophe. Look no further to protests in Spain. The Yellow Vests came back in France. I mean, this is an issue. If we're looking long term outside of just Ukraine, listen, my heart breaks.
That's nice.
But I care just as much about Somalians who are going to starve to death and the rest of the world who cannot keep on their lights and the collateral damage and deaths that are going to come from this, and whether the U.S. and the West will be able to maintain this power when debts are at all-time highs and financing them are at all-time highs, and you're seeing bailouts continue. Look at Uniper. They thought it was going to be a $25 billion.
I'll get protocol. I'll let. I think
I'm going to head out.
There's a lot of points made. Yeah, I appreciate it. You too, bro. You too. Yeah, I've also brought guys. Yeah, just hold on.
Yeah,
just quickly. I've brought.
Just to add some verification that he's correct, of course, that yes, that Sweden did say that this was an act of gross sabotage, and they found traces of explosives on several foreign objects, but they said specifically that it was too early to accuse any individuals of a crime. They haven't said that it's the UK. They haven't said that it's anything else. They did not come out and blame Russia, as other Western officials have said, without even having an investigation done, necessarily. But just to clarify, they have said it is too early to accuse any individuals of a crime yet.
So I just want to speak.
I'll let you go, Piotr.
By the way, just really quick, Mario. Since Piotr is so key on, disclosure of biases, Czech has been a member of the U.S. intelligence community, and therefore this is where his alliance lies. So anything he says, everyone should just keep that in mind, that he has his own biases because of that.
Of course, I would never, if you look at my profile, I don't think this is hidden story, Kim. I don't think you're breaking news to anyone. The thing for me, actually, is that I don't stand for everything that's happened inside of the intelligence community just because I was a member of it. And to say so is an ad hominem attack. And frankly,
well, yeah, you were cursing
that
earlier,
I don't
so.
take lightly.
All right, guys, so quickly, Piotr, I know you... just do quickly. Sorry, Johnny. I'll give you the mic. I was going to announce that I brought you up, so I found Mike, put his hand up. He's a journalist in Donbass. So Donbass. Johnny, I'll give you the mic right after Piotr responds to Wyatt. So Piotr, I'll let you respond to Wyatt's point, and it'll be good to have Johnny. I've got a few questions for Johnny as well. Michael, Gabriel, I know you have your hand up. David as well, and right click and dupe. We'll get to you guys in a bit as well. Don't worry. Piotr, go ahead, bro.
Yeah, I think this conversation is incredibly powerful, and I again do want to apologise for swearing. It wasn't professional. For those of you criticising me, fair enough. To what Prodigal said, I very much resonate with much of it. I focus on.
So let's just check who Piotr is.
Russia. I have a personal association with this one, which is why I'm maybe a little bit more heated than normal. But yeah, I think
World Bank. Guy works for World Bank.
System here, which is
geopolitics, foreign policy, humanitarian, climate risk for World Bank. So that's his bias.
And the role of a great power on another has global ramifications.
Cursing.
The energy
World Bank.
Cursing. Wouldn't be as bad as it was.
Real classic.
Inflation wouldn't be as high as it is. Food insecurity wouldn't be as bad as it is. All these things are being exacerbated by this conflict, and I don't think we should shy away from that.
Just to add one thought too, just on my perspective and the way that I see these things. If you talk to any of the friends that I'm in close circles with, as this entire Ukrainian and NATO situation was building up before the Russian invasion actually ended up happening, I was specifically telling people, I don't know why the fuck, we're continuously saying that Ukraine should join NATO, and NATO's saying, yes, we're happy to welcome the men as Russia was building up troops on the border. I think that was an incredibly stupid strategic move, and it literally was one of the things that caused an element of this as well. So that's to me.
Yeah, so Piotr, I'll let you answer as well. Wyatt's points about the before I go to Johnny, Wyatt's points about the referendum that was led in those regions. So I think you wanted to comment on that as well.
Yeah, I do. Just to Chad's point, NATO's expansion was reckless. I don't think there was a missed opportunity. I think where NATO and Russia could have engaged better on Russia's security concerns, whilst also trying to find a way to make the countries that wanted to be a part of NATO and were part of the Soviet Union previously, given security reassurances. I think there could have been a better way that we handled it over the 90s and 2000s. But anyway, to what Wyatt is saying, and to refrain from being, immature, Wyatt, I welcome you to, for us to hold the space another time. I speak to everybody of all sides. I'm not one to block.
Chain instead of Pierce, that's very good.
As you can see. So
yes,
if you want to have another conversation,
that would be amazing. If that works for
but aside from
Shotgun, that'd be insane.
To not use overly extending language like a vast majority, overwhelming majority. Clearly, historically speaking, the further east you go in Ukraine, the more of a Russian sentiment grows. Definitely, historically speaking, it was known as Novorossiya, which was about in the 1870s, 90s. Russia controlled, as the imperialist power it was, a large swathe of east and southern Ukraine. You can look this up on a map. And historically, this is played into the
projectile
way
speed for
that,
this as well.
People who live in those regions identify.
The Shotgun
so
becomes
when you talk
absolutely
about
insane.
A growing Russian sentiment, the amount of people who speak
especially
Russian,
if it changes because of the projectile speed.
Russian cultural whatever it is, it grows 100%. My grandmother, who lives in Novosibirsk, her great-grandparents came from the Donbass region. She was part of a Cossack family. So there is definitely overlapping ties between this part of Ukraine and former Russia. So that is not to be disputed. I agree with you there. But I do think it's a little bit far-fetched to say that the overwhelming majority of Ukrainians support being a part of Russia. I think it's a bit more nuanced than that. The place that you would probably
now it's only a bit more nuanced.
Debate of all of this is Crimea for the reasons that we've touched upon already. So hallelujah. I don't necessarily fully disagree with you, but I do.
You don't okay.
As
earlier you were cursing how much you disagree.
Michael, I'll give you.
Just real quick. So Wyatt has been there and has given us eyewitness reports, and he's a journalist, about what happened there. So if he talks about the majority, clear majority, he didn't say just a majority, 90% plus.
Yeah, that's
voting
just
to
ridiculous.
join Russia. That's but
Kim,
that's what he
Kim,
reported.
Kim.
And just a second, just a second here. We have another guy here, Johnny Miller, who is also reporting from Donbass. Maybe we should ask him to get a second opinion.
Yeah, we will. I'll go to.
I was in the Donbass myself, mate.
So also, Johnny, I'll give you the mic. Just 2 seconds. I promise I'll give you the mic. I promise I will. Just before that, Michael, I'll let you go. Piotr, I know you were in the Donbass region as well. I will make the point, like, if we could have, 5 reporters here make a point, etc. But it's also important that, there's hundreds of thousands of people in those regions. So getting statistical evidence of one argument or another is going to be difficult.
Yeah, but if you talk to
so just
hundreds of
something
people,
to
come
mention. But I do think getting the take of someone that is on the ground is important. It is empirical evidence, but it's important nonetheless. Michael, I'll let you add your 2 points. Dupe, I know you want to speak as well, bro. But I'll let Michael add your points before I go to Johnny, and then we'll go to
Let's go polling.
David. Go ahead.
You don't
Michael.
poll every single person in the country.
Yeah, you're welcome. So as I've been sitting here, I've just been adding a few more reference items to the nest so that people can go away and do their own reading. With regard to the referenda in the Ukrainian regions, Mario just made the point. I don't know that any individual journalist, their opinion isn't determinative. And Wyatt said, he got the feeling that people in those regions felt more supported by Russia, but that's not all that valuable compared with some of the resources I pulled up here. I'll also point out that tweet from Wyatt I put up there way back in May, where he noted that with the fall of Mariupol, the epicenter of Ukrainian fascism has officially been denazified. So I imagine he was quite pleased that Russia had achieved its primary war goal way back in May. I'm not sure that he's the most neutral observer. The point was raised. So the question is, can a referendum even be held fairly in these regions? And regardless of how you feel about who started the war,
Michael's got a point.
Claiming to hold a referendum under these circumstances was absurd, in that it cannot be run fairly. The point was raised that many people have.
But it's also that the types of sources Michael's reading are all Western.
Wyatt quickly avoided discussing that line of conversation. The question was asked, haven't many of these refugees gone to Russia? And then it was asked, but wasn't that the...
And you can sort of falsify basically anything nowadays by just
at their will.
kind of like dressing it in a certain way.
In the nest is a tweet by a gentleman named Peter Corliss, who's been following the refugee issue, and he notes that almost 5 million Ukrainians, including almost 750,000 Ukrainian children, have been taken to Russia. Many in cases that would Ukrainians in the occupied territories who were encouraged to send their children to summer camps, and then those children from the camps who were just taken to Russia, and they've just been essentially stolen. So, are people voting fairly in these regions when these things are going on? I would assert that's impossible. Why didn't Russia just wait until circumstances had stabilized and then actually given people?
And just to be clear, I'm on nobody's side on this. I think war is
that claim you just made about children being stolen. Back that up with evidence.
Tara, let me respond to that real quick. No one here seems to remember that there was a Minsk peace agreement that the Ukraine signed that would have allowed these territories to vote on independence. And then Ukraine breached those agreements and the ceasefires that were connected with it, and kept shooting, into Donetsk, Donbass, and so on. And later, let me finish real quick. There's more to this. And then later, the Ukraine government, the new government, has admitted that they never intended to fulfill their obligations under the
extra projectiles mutation, my god.
Negotiated by France and Germany, and that they instead
did the mirror already do that?
Build up their army, get arms in from NATO countries like the British and the US, and get their soldiers trained by these countries in order to take all that territory back. So they side in bad.
What's this got to do with the displacement of people? These are security arrangements in a diplomatic negotiation, not to do with humanitarian displacement of refugees.
Yes, and just to get to Tara's
Peter is starting to yell
on a
again.
source, that comes from the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, which says, quote, the Commission has documented cases in which children have been raped, tortured, and unlawfully confined by Russia. So that's coming from the UN Human Rights Commission.
I want to go to so I know Johnny's been waiting for a while, guys. So Michael, I'll let you add the final quick word to what Kim just said very quickly, and then I'll go to Johnny and Dupe. Go ahead, Michael. Did you want to add one last thing to Kim's points?
Very quickly, do please have a look at sources in the nest, which include the vote in the United Nations, 143.
And when you say nest, just for anyone who doesn't know, nest is just the pinned tweets above by the speakers.
That's right. And so there was a vote in the United Nations. 143 countries have voted to condemn Russia's annexation efforts. So, the world pretty conclusively said this was not run procedurally fairly at a minimum. To back up, Kim referred to the fact that there are claims that most of this voting was done at gunpoint. There are many, many attestations to that on the internet, including here on Twitter. There's one up in the nest. It's the 5th item back. There's lots of videos.
Michael, I'm going to object because Priti Patel said publicly she did not have evidence of children being raped. Also, the Ukrainian official was fired for blowing up false reports. You're presenting U.S. intelligence, and I'm asking the question, Michael, are you working for U.S. intelligence?
What the fuck is that?
What the
Because you're basically repeating propaganda. You're not backing it up with legitimate, unbiased sources.
Tara Reid is talking about Michael Bond.
The UN has said publicly they don't have evidence, and that pretty much
the UN. That's the exact opposite of what they've said.
I'm putting my sources up. You're welcome to put up your source where the UN says they don't have evidence. Go for it.
Well, let's let Johnny Miller go from here. He's on the ground.
I'll give Johnny just quickly. Tara, did you want to put the source? Johnny, just quickly. Tara, do you want to pin your source as well? Just the point.
You know what? I'm gonna send them to you, Mario, because I don't know how to use the thing. I'm on my phone.
Sure. Do that. Yeah, please do. And then Romy, if you can. Yeah, Michael, I'll let you finish what you were saying. And then
I feel like Tara might not have sources though.
Sure, I'd like to know the point of how debate run.
It didn't sound
if
like.
I'm doing a good job and Tara is dissatisfied with the sources that I'm sharing, she either attacks me in an ad hominem way, which obviously none of that's true. I'm just an independent lawyer living in Canada. But then at the same time, she just wants to move on to the next speaker, who happens to be a Russian-affiliated journalist based in, reporting from Ukraine. She wants to move on because I'm making good points. I also wanted to point out...
I want to move on because I think you're just repeating State Department propaganda and British propaganda, and that's what you're doing.
And you're just repeating Russian propaganda.
This is so funny. Everybody's so biased to every single direction. There's no way to find out the truth anymore.
Michael, you
anything.
just called someone a Russian-affiliated journalist, and that is just false. He's an Iranian-affiliated journalist.
Well, you see, Iran and Russia are now allied in the supply of
weapons. Are you talking about me now?
Yeah, we are, Johnny.
Can we go back to the topic, not personal attacks?
No, go ahead, Johnny. So of course. So Johnny, I'll let you go. Thanks for waiting, and then I'll dupe. You'll go right after, and then we'll get other speakers. Go ahead, man.
Yes, so I'm a journalist. I was in Maidan in 2014. I've been in Odessa in 2015 or 16.
Johnny Miller.
I was in Kiev in April when the Russians were surrounding it, and since then I spent most of my time in Donbass, Luhansk, Zaporozhye, and Crimea.
Doesn't sound very Russian to me.
Since the Russian invasion, and it is an invasion, in February. There's so many questions I could answer, I think, from this debate. It's been a fantastic debate, guys. One of the things I could speak about is the Ukrainian shelling of Donbass. It's been going on for 8 years. I've seen the bodies. Just to give you one story, it was a journalist's friend's birthday at a restaurant. There was a bombing. It just happens every day. Less so now. I popped by, it was a bus shelter, bodies in the street. Turned up late and said to the journalists what happened, and they just shrugged. It's just another day in Donbass as Ukraine has been shelling, and they target bus stations, markets, hospitals. So whenever I've got a day off or whenever I have nothing planned, I simply follow the incoming. And whenever I go there, it's usually a bus station, a hospital, a
Just
once again, I dislike this game.
So, John, I might interrupt you just for quick questions. So sorry if it's just when you say, when you say targeting, and that question goes in this case it's relative to the Ukrainian bombing, but it goes for both sides. When you say they're targeting
I'm gonna stop the video here
shelters, and then on the other side as well, when